Tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Westbrook Preparatory's playground as Calvin Reeves checked his watch. 4:45 p.m. His daughter Mia's school had been dismissed almost an hour ago. This was the third time this month he'd received last-minute client emergencies forcing him to be late. As chief architect at Horizon Designs, Calvin had built his reputation on attention to detail and unwavering reliability, qualities that made him feel all the more guilty as he hurried across the parking lot. Calvin was a man whose life had been built through planning. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and permanent laugh lines told the story of someone who'd earned everything he had. Unlike many in his professional circle, Calvin hadn't come from money or connections. Born to a steel worker and a waitress in Pittsburgh, he put himself through architecture school by working construction during summers, learning buildings from foundation to finial. The school's hallways were quiet as Calvin made his way to the after-hours program. Through the classroom window, he spotted Mia sitting alone, her dark curls falling forward as she concentrated on a drawing. His heart clenched at the sight. In the past year, he'd noticed his 10-year-old daughter becoming increasingly withdrawn, her once exuberant personality fading like watercolors left in the sun. "Mr. Reeves," a voice called from behind him. "Do you have a moment?" Calvin turned to find Denise Lockhart, Mia's fourth-grade teacher, standing in the hallway. With her practical cardigan and sensible shoes, Ms. Lockhart reminded Calvin of his own elementary school teachers, observant and uncompromisingly honest. "Of course," Calvin replied, glancing through the window at Mia again. "Is everything all right with Mia? I've noticed she's been quieter lately." Ms. Lockhart hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Mia is a wonderful student, but she's been having some adjustment issues. I've been meaning to speak with you or your wife, but you're both difficult to pin down. My apologies. Work has been demanding, and Laurel's business keeps her just as busy," Calvin explained. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," Ms. Lockhart said, lowering her voice. "Mr. Reeves, are you aware that your wife's boyfriend has been picking Mia up from school nearly every day this semester?" The words hit Calvin like a physical blow. He managed to keep his expression neutral through years of high-stakes client negotiations. But inside, something fundamental shifted. "I'm sorry, my wife's what?" Calvin kept his voice level, though his pulse hammered in his ears. "Oh," Ms. Lockhart's eyes widened with realization. "I assumed. The gentleman who picks up Mia, Mr. Flynn, he's been authorized on your family's pickup list for months. He always refers to your wife as my Laurel, and Mia calls him Uncle Palmer. I thought perhaps you had an arrangement." Calvin's mind raced through a catalog of memories. Laurel's increased business trips, the late-night calls she took in the bathroom with the shower running, the subtle distance that had grown between them like frost on a window. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Ms. Lockhart. I appreciate your concern for Mia." Calvin's voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Too calm, too controlled. After collecting Mia with a forced smile and cheerful questions about her day, Calvin drove home to their colonial-style house in the prestigious Grove Hill neighborhood. The house they bought 5 years ago when Laurel's family business, Blackwood Home Goods, had expanded nationwide under her direction. Or what he'd been told was her direction. Palmer Flynn. The name clicked into place now. Laurel's indispensable business development director. The man who'd been at their home for dinner parties, who'd sent Mia expensive birthday gifts, who'd looked Calvin directly in the eye while complimenting him on his successful architectural firm. That night, after Mia went to bed, Calvin searched the house. In Laurel's home office, behind the false bottom of her jewelry box, a hiding place she'd unknowingly revealed years ago when hiding Christmas presents, he found the divorce papers. Already filled out, already signed by her, dated 3 months ago. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested primary custody of Mia. But what knocked the wind from Calvin's lungs wasn't the divorce itself. It was the attached documentation about Blackwood Home Goods, the company that Calvin had helped save a decade ago when Russell Blackwood, Laurel's father, faced bankruptcy. The company that Calvin had restructured, rebranded, and revitalized using his architecture contacts to place their home furnishings in model homes nationwide. The company that, according to these documents, Laurel claimed as separate property unrelated to the marital assets. Calvin remembered how he declined becoming an official partner, wanting to focus on his architecture career. He'd trusted Laurel when she said his contribution would always be recognized. He recalled signing papers years ago, papers Laurel had assured him were just formalizing his advisor role. Papers he now realized had likely stripped him of any legal claim to the business he'd rescued. As dawn broke, Calvin made two decisions. First, he wouldn't sign the divorce papers. Second, before confronting Laurel, he would protect what was rightfully his. Chapter 2. The Architect's Blueprint. "You wanted to see me, boss?" Zoe Mendoza stood in Calvin's office doorway the next morning. At 35, Zoe had been Calvin's right hand at Horizon Designs for 7 years. With her razor-sharp intelligence and unflinching loyalty, she was the only person Calvin trusted with what he was about to do. "Close the door, Zoe. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." For the next hour, Calvin laid out everything. The revelation from Ms. Lockhart, the divorce papers, and his suspicions about Blackwood Home Goods. Zoe listened without interruption, her expression darkening with each detail. "Those manipulative bastards," she finally said. "What do you need me to do?" "I need options. Legal ones first, but—" Calvin paused. "I'm not ruling anything out." Within days, Calvin had assembled a small but formidable team. Besides Zoe, there was Benjamin Navarro, an ex-federal prosecutor turned private attorney who'd once hired Calvin to design his lake house, and Derek Washington, a digital forensics specialist whose brother had been Calvin's college roommate. The good news, Ben explained in the secure conference room of his downtown firm, is that we've found the original paperwork you signed for Blackwood Home Goods. The bad news is that it's exactly what you feared. You signed away any claim to the company in exchange for a one-time consulting fee of $75,000. Calvin remembered that money. It had been presented as a bonus, which he'd used for the down payment on their current home. But, Ben continued, his expression shifting to one of calculated satisfaction, Laurel and her father made a critical mistake. The paperwork references an addendum that details your architectural and business development contributions. That addendum is missing from their filed copies. And I found the original in Russell Blackwood's private email server, Derek added, sliding a folder across the table, along with some very interesting correspondences between Laurel and Palmer Flynn dating back almost 3 years. The emails revealed a calculated plan. Russell Blackwood had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia 3 years ago, a fact kept hidden from shareholders and family alike. Laurel and Palmer had been positioning themselves to take control, systematically removing anyone loyal to Russell. They'd also been systematically erasing Calvin's contributions to the company's success. "There's more," Zoe said quietly. "I followed the money trail through Blackwood's corporate accounts. Laurel and Palmer have been siphoning funds into a holding company, Aurelia Partners. They've amassed nearly $3 million. Calvin felt a cold clarity wash over him. That's my daughter's future they're stealing. That night, Calvin utilized banking credentials that Laurel didn't know he possessed, joint account access that had never been revoked when she had established her separate business accounts. In a series of carefully orchestrated transfers, Calvin moved $2.97 million, almost the exact amount that had been siphoned away from various Blackwood accounts into a new secure trust established in Mia's name, with Calvin as trustee. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same architectural precision that had built his career was now being applied to dismantling his wife's betrayal, blueprint by blueprint. While the financial maneuvers were underway, Calvin maintained perfect normalcy at home. He left for work at the same time each morning, asked Laurel about her day each evening, and never once let on that he knew about Palmer Flynn. The performance required every ounce of self-control he possessed, particularly when he noticed how frequently Laurel checked her phone during dinner or how she always seemed to find reasons to stay at the office late. 2 weeks after Ms. Lockhart's revelation, Calvin's phone vibrated with a text from Derek, package delivered. The digital evidence was secure, the financial trails documented, and the legal groundwork laid. It was time for Phase 2. Chapter 3. Structural Weaknesses. Russell Blackwood lived in a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had been in the Blackwood family for 3 generations. Now 71, Russell had become increasingly reclusive since his wife's death 5 years earlier. According to Laurel, her father was enjoying retirement by traveling extensively. Calvin now knew this was a cover for hiding Russell's cognitive decline. Mr. Reeves, Russell's live-in nurse, Marjorie, greeted Calvin at the door. "This is unexpected. Mr. Blackwood isn't scheduled for visitors today. It's important that I speak with him, Marjorie. It concerns his daughter." Something in Calvin's tone must have conveyed the gravity of the situation, because Marjorie hesitated only briefly before leading him to Russell's study. The room smelled of leather and the cherry-pipe tobacco Russell had favored for decades. The man himself sat by the window, thinner than Calvin remembered, staring out at the meticulously maintained gardens. "Russell," Calvin said gently, approaching the older man. "It's Calvin, Laurel's husband." Russell turned, confusion briefly clouding his features before recognition dawned. "Calvin, the architect. You designed the new Blackwood showrooms. Brilliant work, doubled our foot traffic." For the next hour, Calvin carefully navigated a conversation with Russell, whose lucidity came and went like weak radio signals. What emerged was heartbreaking. Russell was aware enough to know something was wrong at his company, but had been systematically isolated by Laurel and Palmer. His nurse was instructed to limit his visitors, his phone calls were screened, and his mail was organized by Laurel's personal assistant. "She thinks I don't notice," Russell said during a moment of perfect clarity. "My daughter thinks because I forget things, I don't see what's happening. But I built that company from a single store. I know when something isn't right." By the end of the visit, Calvin had secured something invaluable. Russell's signature on a set of documents that Ben had prepared, officially reinstating Calvin as a consultant to Blackwood Home Goods with full access to company records. More importantly, Russell signed an affidavit stating that Calvin's contributions had been integral to the company's national expansion and that any agreements minimizing his role had not been made with Russell's informed consent. That night, Laurel announced she had to fly to Chicago for an emergency meeting with a major retailer. Calvin noted she packed her best lingerie and the perfume she only wore on special occasions. "Give Palmer my regards," Calvin said calmly as she was leaving. Laurel froze, her hand on the door handle. "What did you say?" "Palmer Flynn, your boyfriend. The man who's been picking up our daughter from school. The man you're planning to leave me for after you've secured full control of the company I helped save." Calvin maintained eye contact, his voice steady. "Did I miss anything?" The color drained from Laurel's face. "Calvin, I can explain." "No need. I found the divorce papers. Very thorough, especially the parts where you claim Blackwood Home Goods has nothing to do with me." For a moment, genuine remorse seemed to flicker across Laurel's features. Then her expression hardened into something Calvin had never seen before, calculated, cold determination. "We both know you turned down being an official partner. You wanted to focus on your precious buildings. Palmer understands business in ways you never did." Her voice took on a rehearsed quality. "I was going to be fair about this, Calvin. Generous, even. But if you're going to be difficult, save it." Calvin interrupted. "Go to Chicago. Have your meeting. We'll discuss this when you return." After Laurel left, Calvin called Ben. "She's moving forward with her plan. Time to accelerate ours." The next morning, Calvin walked into the main headquarters of Blackwood Home Goods for the first time in months. With Russell's signed authorization and Ben by his side, he bypassed the front desk and headed straight for the executive floor. The receptionist's startled call to security was intercepted by Ben's calm presentation of their paperwork. By noon, Calvin was ensconced in a conference room, systematically reviewing company records with a team of forensic accountants. By 3, they had documented evidence of the systematic embezzlement scheme Laurel and Palmer had constructed. By 5, Calvin had spoken personally with every board member, sharing selective evidence of what he discovered. When Laurel and Palmer returned from Chicago 2 days later, they walked into an emergency board meeting already in progress. The shock on their faces when they saw Calvin sitting at Russell's right hand was everything he had anticipated. "What is he doing here?" Laurel demanded, her composed facade cracking at the edges. "Getting reacquainted with the company he helped build," Russell replied with surprising strength. "The company you've been stealing from, apparently." What followed was 3 hours of meticulous presentation of evidence. Email exchanges between Laurel and Palmer plotting to hide Russell's condition. Financial records showing the diverted funds. Documented instances where Calvin's contributions had been deliberately erased from company history. "This is absurd," Palmer finally spluttered, his handsome face contorted with rage. "Russell, your condition is clearly affecting your judgment. And as for you, Calvin, you signed away any claim to this company years ago." "About that," Ben interjected smoothly, placing copies of the missing addendum A before each board member. "Mr. Reeves never relinquished his rights to recognition for his contributions. More importantly, the systematic fraud perpetrated by Ms. Blackwood and Mr. Flynn constitutes clear grounds for criminal charges." The board voted unanimously to suspend Laurel and Palmer pending a full investigation. As security escorted them from the building, Laurel turned to Calvin with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over. You just guaranteed you'll never see me again." Calvin simply watched them go, the first phase of his plan complete. But he knew Laurel was right about one thing. This was far from over. Chapter 4. Foundation Cracks. "Daddy, why are you sleeping in the guest room?" Mia's question hung in the breakfast nook of their home 2 weeks after the board meeting. Calvin had maintained as much normalcy as possible for his daughter, but children notice everything, especially bright, sensitive ones like Mia. "Mom and I are having some grown-up disagreements right now," Calvin answered carefully. "But I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and we both love you very much." "Is it because of Uncle Palmer?" Mia asked, poking at her pancakes. "Mom cries when she talks to him on the phone now." Calvin kept his expression neutral, though his hand tightened imperceptibly around his coffee mug. "What have you heard Mom saying to Uncle Palmer?" "That you've ruined everything. That Grandpa Russell is sicker than everyone thinks. That you're trying to steal her company." Mia looked up, her brown eyes, so like Calvin's own, filled with confusion. "But you wouldn't steal, would you, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart, I wouldn't steal. Sometimes adults see the same situation very differently." He reached across the table to squeeze her small hand. "The important thing is that you don't worry about any of this. It's adult business, and your job is just to be Mia." After dropping Mia at school, Calvin drove to Ben's office for their now daily strategy meeting. The suspension of Laurel and Palmer had been only a temporary victory. As Calvin had expected, they were fighting back with everything they had. "They've filed their countersuit," Ben announced without preamble as Calvin entered. "And it's nasty. They're claiming you manipulated Russell due to his diminished capacity. They got statements from 3 of Russell's doctors suggesting he's not competent to make business decisions." "Doctors on Laurel's payroll, no doubt," Calvin responded. "Almost certainly, but it complicates things." Ben shuffled through papers on his desk. "They're also pushing forward with the divorce. Laurel's claiming you were emotionally abusive and that your recent actions constitute economic abuse and harassment." Calvin had anticipated this. The best defense is a good offense. Laurel would try to paint him as the villain to distract from her own actions. "What about the money?" Calvin asked. "That's where things get interesting," Ben replied with a grim smile. "They've just discovered the missing funds. Laurel's lawyer is demanding an emergency hearing, claiming you've stolen company assets." This had been the riskiest part of Calvin's plan. Transferring the money had technically been illegal, but it had created exactly the leverage he needed. "Have they filed a police report?" "Not yet. My guess is they're hesitant to involve authorities given their own financial misconduct." Calvin nodded. "As expected, set up a meeting with Laurel and her lawyer. Make it clear I'm willing to discuss returning the funds as part of a global settlement." While the legal battles intensified, life at home became increasingly unbearable. Laurel vacillated between icy silence and vicious verbal attacks. Calvin documented everything, recording conversations when legally permitted and keeping meticulous notes of every interaction, especially those involving Mia. The most difficult aspect was watching how the conflict affected his daughter. Mia's teacher reported she had become withdrawn at school. She had nightmares frequently. Worst of all, Laurel had begun using Mia as a pawn, canceling Calvin's planned activities with their daughter at the last minute and filling Mia's head with subtle suggestions that her father was the cause of all the family problems. 6 weeks into the legal battle, Calvin received an unexpected call from Marjorie, Russell's nurse. "Mr. Reeves, I'm breaking protocol by calling you, but Mr. Blackwood has been hospitalized. His condition has deteriorated significantly. He's asking for you." Calvin drove directly to Boston Memorial, where he found Russell connected to various monitors, looking frilier than ever. Despite his weakened state, Russell's eyes lit with recognition when Calvin entered. "They're trying to declare me incompetent," Russell said without preamble, his voice thin but determined. "Trying to take everything I built. I know, Russell. We're fighting it. Not hard enough." Russell gestured weakly for Calvin to come closer. "Bottom drawer of my desk at home. False panel. There's a flash drive. Everything you need is there." Before Calvin could ask what he meant, Russell continued, "I wasn't always confused, Calvin. I knew what Laurel was doing for years. I kept records. Thought I might need them someday." A rattling cough interrupted him. "Didn't know it would be against my own daughter." The flash drive contained a treasure trove of documentation. Recordings of conversations, financial records, and most damning of all, Russell's personal journal detailing his observations of Laurel and Palmer's behavior dating back 5 years. Russell had been much more aware than anyone realized, and in his lucid moments, he had built a case against his daughter's betrayal. Armed with this new evidence, Calvin and Ben revised their strategy. Rather than just defending against Laurel's accusations, they would go on the offensive, using Russell's documentation to support their claims of fraud and elder abuse. Meanwhile, Palmer Flynn was growing increasingly desperate. The board's investigation had frozen his assets, and rumors of financial impropriety had made him toxic in the business community. Calvin received word that Palmer had been seen meeting with less than reputable characters known for their problem-solving services. "We need to be careful," Zoe warned Calvin one evening as they worked late at Horizon Designs. "These people play by different rules. Palmer has nothing left to lose." "Let him try something," Calvin replied, the cold determination that had become his constant companion hardening his voice. "It'll just give me one more advantage." 2 nights later, Calvin's home security system alerted him to movement in the backyard. The security cameras showed 2 men in dark clothing attempting to access the house through the garden door. Calvin calmly called the police, then activated the additional security measures he'd recently installed: bright floodlights and an alarm that would make the neighbors think a military base was under attack. The would-be intruders fled, but not before the cameras captured clear images of their faces. By morning, Ben had identified one of them as a former client of Palmer's with multiple assault charges in his background. "File for an emergency protection order," Calvin instructed Ben. "For both me and Mia. Make sure the petition highlights Palmer's connection to these men." The failed break-in proved to be a turning point. The judge granted the protection order, which prohibited Palmer from coming within 500 feet of Calvin or Mia. More significantly, it raised serious questions about Palmer's character just as the board was concluding its investigation. Laurel, recognizing that her position was weakening, attempted a new approach. She arrived at Calvin's office unannounced, dressed in the blue suit she knew he had always admired, her expression contrite. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice deliberately soft. "Without the lawyers?" "For Mia's sake, if nothing else." Calvin gestured to the visitor's chair, his face revealing nothing of the contempt he felt. This was the woman who had shared his bed for 12 years, who had given birth to his child, who had once been his partner in every sense of the word. Now she was just another opponent to outmaneuver. "I've been thinking about what this is doing to Mia," Laurel began, her eyes welling with what appeared to be genuine tears. "She needs both her parents, Calvin. This war between us, it's hurting her more than anyone." "I agree," Calvin replied evenly. which is why I've documented every time you've used her as a weapon against me. Canceled visit, lie you've told her about me, every time you've had Palmer pick her up from school against my explicit wishes. Laurel's facade cracked slightly. That's not fair. I was trying to maintain normalcy for her. By having your lover play daddy? Calvin's voice remained calm, though his eyes hardened. Let's not pretend this is about Mia's well-being. If you want to talk settlement, have your lawyer call Ben. Otherwise, there's nothing more to discuss. You've changed, Laurel said, rising to leave. The Calvin I married would never be this cold, this calculating. The Calvin you married trusted you, he replied simply. That man doesn't exist anymore. After Laurel left, Calvin sat motionless at his desk for several minutes, allowing the emotional aftermath of the encounter to wash over him. There had been a moment, brief but undeniable, when he had felt the pull of their shared history. But then he remembered the divorce papers, hidden like a coward's knife. He remembered Mia's confusion and pain. He remembered Russell's betrayed trust. The time for sentiment had long passed. Now was the time for justice. Chapter 5. Load-bearing walls. The courthouse steps were slick with November rain as Calvin arrived for the preliminary hearing in the civil case against Laurel and Palmer. The past 3 months had been a grueling war of attrition. Legal motions, countersuits, and increasingly desperate attempts by Laurel to regain control of Blackwood Home Goods. Ready for this? Ben asked as they climbed the steps, sheltered under a large black umbrella. As ready as I'll ever be, Calvin replied. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with interested parties, board members, company executives, even a few business reporters sensing a story beyond the usual corporate squabble. Across the aisle, Laurel sat with her legal team, her posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. Palmer was notably absent, having been advised by a separate counsel to distance himself from Laurel's case. Judge Miranda Watkins, known for her no-nonsense approach and intolerance for legal gamesmanship, entered the courtroom. Before we begin formal arguments, she announced after the preliminary matters were addressed, I want to be clear. I've reviewed the filings from both sides, and I'm disturbed by the accusations flying back and forth. This appears to be both a business dispute and a family matter spinning out of control. The judge turned her steely gaze to Calvin. Mr. Reeves, you are alleged to have transferred nearly $3 million from Blackwood corporate accounts without authorization. Do you deny this? No, Your Honor, I do not, Calvin answered steadily. And can you explain why the court shouldn't order those funds returned immediately and sanction you appropriately? Ben rose to interject, but Calvin placed a hand on his arm. If I may, Your Honor. At the judge's nod, Calvin continued. The funds I transferred represent almost exactly the amount that Ms. Blackwood and Mr. Flynn diverted from the company over the past 3 years. I moved those funds to protect them from further misappropriation, and I'm prepared to return them to the appropriate corporate accounts once proper financial controls are in place. Judge Watkins raised an eyebrow. That's quite an accusation, Mr. Reeves. I assume you have evidence to support it. Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Calvin nodded to Ben, who approached the bench with a thick binder, including documentation from Russell Blackwood himself. The next 2 hours were devoted to an overview of the evidence from both sides. Judge Watkins listened impassively, occasionally interrupting with pointed questions. When Laurel's attorney attempted to argue that Russell's documentation should be excluded due to his cognitive condition, the judge cut him off sharply. Counsel, I've reviewed Mr. Blackwood's medical records as provided by both parties. While he does have periods of confusion, his doctors, even those presented by your client, agree that he experiences significant periods of lucidity. I will not categorically dismiss his testimony or documentation without proper evaluation. By the end of the hearing, Judge Watkins issued several interim rulings. The funds Calvin had transferred would remain frozen in their current accounts. Neither Laurel nor Palmer would be permitted access to Blackwood corporate records or facilities until the matter was resolved. And most significantly, the court would appoint an independent business evaluator to assess Calvin's contributions to the company's success. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded both parties. While Laurel's attorney offered no comment platitudes, Calvin spoke briefly but directly. This case is about more than money or corporate control, he stated, his voice clear despite the rain now falling heavily. It's about recognizing the truth. Blackwood Home Goods succeeded because of collaboration, Russell Blackwood's vision, my architectural and business expertise, and the hard work of hundreds of employees. I simply want that truth acknowledged. The next day, the business pages carried the story, most with headlines emphasizing the dramatic personal elements: architect's revenge, the battle for Blackwood, and family business or family betrayal. The public narrative was shifting in Calvin's favor, painting him as the wronged husband fighting to protect his legacy. That evening, as Calvin worked in his home office, the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Palmer Flynn. "You're violating the protection order," Calvin said calmly, though his body tensed for potential confrontation. "I don't give a damn about your protection order," Palmer replied, his once smooth appearance now disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "You've destroyed my reputation, frozen my assets. I can't even get a consulting gig because everyone thinks I'm some kind of corporate thief. Aren't you?" Calvin remained in the doorway, blocking entry. "The evidence seems pretty clear." Palmer laughed bitterly. "Evidence you manufactured with a senile old man. You think you're so clever, so righteous. But we both know what this is really about. You couldn't stand that Laurel chose me, that she recognized you were never going to be more than a glorified draftsman, while I could take Blackwood global." Calvin studied the man before him, the man who had smiled at him across dinner tables while sleeping with his wife, who had high-fived Mia's good grades while plotting to take her away from him, who had shaken his hand while systematically erasing his contributions to Blackwood's success. "You're done, Palmer," Calvin said quietly. "The board has the true financial records now. The independent evaluator will confirm my role in the company's growth. You and Laurel overplayed your hand, and now you're going to lose everything." Palmer's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Calvin thought he might attack. Instead, Palmer leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Or capable of." After Palmer left, Calvin immediately called Ben to report the violation of the protection order. Then he reviewed his home security footage and sent the recording of Palmer's threat to his legal team. Each move and countermove was part of the larger strategy: anticipate, document, leverage. The following week brought a significant development. The independent business evaluator, Dr. Elaine Torres, submitted her preliminary report to the court. Her conclusion was unequivocal. Calvin's architectural innovations and business strategies have been central to Blackwood Home Goods' national expansion. Conservative estimates valued his contribution at approximately 40% of the company's growth over the past decade. This assessment changed the legal landscape dramatically. If accepted by the court, it meant Calvin had a legitimate claim to a substantial portion of the company's value, far more than the one-time payment he had received. It also validated his assertion that Laurel and Palmer had deliberately minimized his role to maintain control. Laurel's response was immediate and desperate. She filed an emergency motion challenging Dr. Torres's qualifications and methodology. When that failed, she attempted a new angle, claiming that Calvin's recent actions constituted corporate espionage and violated various non-disclosure agreements. "She's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks," Ben observed during their strategy session. "It's the approach of someone who knows they're losing." But Laurel had one more card to play, one that struck at Calvin's most vulnerable point. She filed for emergency sole custody of Mia, claiming that Calvin's obsessive pursuit of the Blackwood case had made him an unfit parent. The petition included statement from Mia's new therapist, one Calvin had never met and didn't know existed, suggesting that Mia felt unsafe with her father's unpredictable behavior. The custody filing blindsided Calvin. While he had anticipated and prepared for nearly every other move in this chess game, he had not expected Laurel to use Mia so blatantly. It was the one area where his strategic calculation faltered, where emotion threatened to override reason. "She can't do this," Calvin said, pacing Ben's office after receiving the filing. "She can't use our daughter as leverage." "She can try," Ben replied grimly. But judges aren't stupid. This reeks of tactical maneuvering, especially coming right after Dr. Torres's report. Calvin stopped pacing, his resolve hardening once more. Give me everything on this therapist. Find out when Mia started seeing them, who made the appointments, who pays the bills, and set up a meeting with the custody evaluator the court will appoint. I want them to hear our side first. The investigation revealed exactly what Calvin had suspected. The therapist, Dr. Valerie Monroe, had been a college friend of Laurel's and had only seen Mia 3 times before writing her report. More damning still, the appointments had been scheduled immediately after Dr. Torres was appointed as the business evaluator, suggesting a premeditated strategy. Armed with this information, Calvin's team filed a motion to disqualify Dr. Monroe's testimony and requested that the court appoint a neutral child psychologist to evaluate Mia's well-being. Judge Watkins, now overseeing both the business case and the custody matter due to their interconnected nature, granted the motion. The appointed psychologist, Dr. Marcus Way, conducted thorough interviews with Mia, Calvin, and Laurel over several weeks. His report painted a starkly different picture than Dr. Monroe's. Mia was indeed suffering emotional distress, but primarily due to the conflict between her parents and the inconsistent messages she was receiving from Laurel about her father. Most significantly, Dr. Way noted that Mia expressed feeling most secure and stable when with Calvin, whose parenting approach had remained consistent despite the turmoil. In contrast, Laurel's parenting had become erratic, swinging between overindulgence and emotional withdrawal, often seeming more focused on winning Mia's loyalty than addressing her needs. The custody hearing was scheduled for early December, just 2 weeks before the final hearing in the business case. As the date approached, Calvin received an unexpected phone call from Russell Blackwood's attorney. Mr. Blackwood passed away last night, the attorney informed him solemnly. Peacefully, in his sleep, he amended his will recently and requested that you attend the reading tomorrow. Calvin felt genuine grief at the news. Despite their complicated relationship in recent years, he had respected Russell immensely. The man had built a business from nothing, weathered countless challenges, and maintained his dignity even as his mind and body betrayed him. The will reading the next day delivered Russell's final surprise. He had left controlling interest in his shares of Blackwood Home Goods to a trust, with Calvin named as one of 3 trustees alongside Russell's longtime friend and attorney. Laurel received a significant financial inheritance, but no direct control of the company. Most astounding was the letter Russell had prepared to be read after his will, addressed directly to Calvin. You saw value in my company when others, including my daughter, saw only a fading legacy. You respected my vision while adding your own. Most importantly, you fought for the truth when it would have been easier to walk away. I entrust Blackwood's future to you, not out of spite toward Laurel, but because you embody the principles on which I built this company. As Calvin left the attorney's office, he found Laurel waiting by his car, her expression a complex mixture of grief, rage, and defeat. Happy now? She asked bitterly. You've taken everything. Calvin regarded her thoughtfully. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the passionate, ambitious partner he had married. Whether she had changed or he had simply been blind to her true nature, he couldn't say with certainty. I never wanted to take anything from you, Laurel. I just wanted recognition for what I built and protection for Mia's future. You expect me to believe that? Laurel laughed harshly. This whole revenge campaign, the money, the court cases, turning my own father against me. It was all about your precious recognition. It was about justice, Calvin replied simply. Something you and Palmer seemed to have forgotten existed. Laurel's face hardened. This isn't justice. This is you winning at all costs. But remember, Calvin, in war, there are always casualties. As she walked away, Calvin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. Laurel's words had sounded distinctly like a threat, and with the custody hearing approaching, he couldn't afford to underestimate her desperation. Chapter 6: Structural Collapse. The evening before the custody hearing found Calvin working late at Horizon Designs, finalizing a presentation for a potential major client. Life and business continued despite the personal turmoil. Zoe had stayed to help, their easy professional rhythm unaffected by the stress of recent months. "You should go home, get some rest before tomorrow," Zoe advised, noting Calvin's exhausted appearance. "Soon," he promised. "I just need to finalize these renderings." Calvin's phone rang. Marissa Delgado, the neighbor who was watching Mia while Calvin worked and Laurel attended a pre-funeral gathering for her father. "Calvin, you need to come home now." Marissa's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Mia's gone." The world tilted on its axis. "What do you mean, gone?" "I want to check on her after putting my kids to bed," and she wasn't in her room. The back door was unlocked. "I've searched the whole house, the yard. She's not here, Calvin." Calvin was already grabbing his coat, signaling frantically to Zoe. "Call the police. I'm on my way." The next hour was a blur of police questions, neighbors joining the search, and frantic calls to anyone who might have seen Mia. Calvin tried repeatedly to reach Laurel, but got no response. When the police asked about custody arrangements and whether Laurel might have taken Mia, Calvin hesitated. Could Laurel have done something so reckless, so potentially damaging to her own custody case? As midnight approached with still no sign of Mia, Calvin's phone finally rang with Laurel's number. But it was Palmer's voice that answered. "Looking for your daughter, architect." The slurred words suggested Palmer had been drinking. "Maybe you should check your precious company. Isn't that what you care about most?" "Palmer, where is Mia?" Calvin fought to keep his voice level as he motioned to the police officer beside him to listen in. "Consider this a negotiation," Palmer replied. "You want your daughter back safely? Sign over your trustee position at Blackwood. Withdraw all your claims. Confess to the judge that you manipulated Russell and fabricated evidence against us." Cold rage flooded Calvin's system. "Let me speak to Mia." After a moment of rustling, Mia's frightened voice came through. "Daddy, I want to come home. Uncle Palmer said we're playing a game, but I don't like it." "It's okay, sweetheart," Calvin said, forcing confidence into his voice. "You're going to be okay. I'm coming to get you." The call ended abruptly. The police officer immediately began coordinating with dispatch, putting out an Amber Alert and organizing units to begin searching properties associated with Palmer and Laurel. Calvin's phone rang again, this time with a text message containing an address in the industrial district where Blackwood maintained its main warehouse. "Midnight. Come alone, or we call this whole thing off." Showing the message to the police, Calvin insisted on going despite their objections. "He knows me. If he sees police, there's no telling what he might do." A compromise was reached. Calvin would approach alone, but with police positioned discreetly nearby and a tracking device and wire concealed on his person. The warehouse loomed dark and imposing as Calvin parked outside. Following Palmer's texted instructions, he entered through a side door, finding himself in the cavernous main storage area, dimly lit by emergency lighting. "I'm here," Calvin called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Where's my daughter?" Palmer emerged from behind a stack of crates, looking disheveled and unhinged. The great Calvin Reeves, finally somewhere he can't control everything. "Where's Mia?" Calvin repeated. "Safe. For now." Palmer gestured vaguely toward the back offices. "Laurel's with her. Laurel's part of this." Even after everything, Calvin had trouble believing she would endanger their daughter. "Not exactly." Palmer laughed bitterly. "She thinks I brought Mia here to talk to you about a settlement. Doesn't know about our little custody insurance plan." Understanding dawned. "She doesn't know you've kidnapped our daughter." Such an ugly word, kidnap. Palmer moved closer, the smell of whiskey evident on his breath. "I prefer leveraging an asset. Something you should understand, given how you've been playing this game." Calvin maintained his composure with effort. "This isn't a game, Palmer. It's my daughter's life. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen if you do exactly what I say." Palmer pulled papers from his jacket. "Sign these. They transfer your trustee position to Laurel and withdraw all your claims against Blackwood. Sign them, and you get Mia back, no harm done." Calvin took the papers, pretending to review them. "And if I refuse?" Palmer's expression darkened. "Then things get complicated. Maybe Mia gets lost somewhere, no one will find her for a while." Maybe there's an unfortunate accident at this condemned warehouse. The warehouse isn't condemned, Calvin noted, playing for time as he knew the police were positioning themselves. It will be after the fire. Palmer produced a lighter, flicking it meaningfully. Old wiring in these places. So dangerous. Calvin heard a noise from the direction Palmer had indicated earlier. Mia's voice, calling for her mother. The sound galvanized him. "Let me see her first," Calvin demanded. "Let me know she's unharmed, and then I'll sign." Palmer hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." But no tricks. As they moved toward the office area, Calvin caught sight of Laurel through a window, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she realized what was happening. The moment Palmer opened the office door, Calvin surged forward, pushing past him to reach Mia. "Daddy!" Mia ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "What the hell is going on?" Laurel demanded, looking between Palmer and Calvin. "You said we were meeting to discuss a settlement." "Change of plans," Palmer snarled, producing a gun from his jacket. "Nobody's leaving until Calvin signs those papers." "Have you lost your mind?" Laurel's face had gone pale. "Put that away. This is our daughter. It's always been about your daughter, hasn't it?" Palmer's voice rose hysterically. "Poor little Mia, who needs her daddy. What about what I need? 3 years I've worked to position us to take over Blackwood, and you let him destroy everything in a matter of months." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Calvin positioned himself between Palmer and Mia, evaluating escape options. Through the window, he could see police officers moving into position. "Palmer, think about what you're doing," Calvin said calmly. "The building is surrounded. You've already committed kidnapping. Don't make it worse." For a moment, indecision flickered across Palmer's face. Then his expression hardened. "They can't arrest me if they can't find me. And they won't find any of us once this place burns." He raised a gun, but before he could act, Laurel launched herself at him. "Run!" she screamed to Calvin and Mia as she grappled with Palmer for control of the weapon. Calvin didn't hesitate. Scooping Mia into his arms, he bolted for the exit as the gun went off behind them. Outside, police swarmed forward as Calvin cleared the doorway with Mia. In the chaos that followed, Palmer was subdued and arrested, while paramedics rushed in to attend to Laurel, who had been shot in the struggle. Hours later, at the hospital, Calvin sat beside Mia's bed as she finally slept, sedated by the pediatric trauma specialists. The psychological evaluation would come later, but for now, she was physically unharmed and safe. A detective entered quietly. "Mr. Reeves? Mrs. Blackwood is out of surgery. The doctor says she'll recover." And Palmer, in custody, multiple felony charges, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder. "He's not going anywhere for a long time." Calvin nodded, relief washing through him. "What about Laurel? Will she be charged too?" "Based on statements from all parties, including your testimony about the phone call, it appears she was unaware of Mr. Flynn's intentions. Unless evidence suggests otherwise, she likely won't face kidnapping charges." After the detective left, Calvin continued his vigil at Mia's bedside, the events of the night replaying in his mind. Despite everything Laurel had done, she had ultimately put herself between their daughter and danger. It didn't erase the betrayal or the manipulation, but it was something, a reminder that even in the darkest situations, humanity could occasionally surprise you. The custody hearing scheduled for the next day was postponed in light of the events. When it finally took place 2 weeks later, the landscape had changed dramatically. Palmer was awaiting trial. Laurel was recovering physically while facing her own legal consequences for the financial fraud, and Calvin had been granted temporary full custody of Mia, who was receiving intensive therapy to process the trauma. The judge, after reviewing the events and all evidence, issued her ruling with unmistakable clarity. Given the totality of circumstances, primary physical custody is awarded to Calvin Reeves, with Laurel Blackwood granted supervised visitation pending completion of court-mandated counseling and parenting classes. It was, in many ways, a Pyrrhic victory. Calvin had protected Mia and secured his rightful place at Blackwood, but at enormous cost. His daughter would carry the scars of that night for years to come. The company he had helped build was now shadowed by scandal, and the family he had once treasured had been irreparably broken. Yet as he tucked Mia into bed that night, listening to her breathing slowly even out into sleep, Calvin felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not happiness, not triumph, but the quiet certainty that he had done what was necessary to protect what mattered most. The road ahead would be long and difficult, rebuilding Mia's sense of security, restructuring Blackwood after the upheaval, redefining his own life in the aftermath of betrayal. But for the first time since that fateful conversation with Ms. Lockhart, Calvin believed that reconstruction was possible. After all, he was an architect. Building something beautiful from wreckage was what he did best. Chapter 7. Laying New Foundations. Spring arrived in Boston with its usual tentative optimism: pale green buds on the trees, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, and the air carrying the promise of renewal. For Calvin, the changing season mirrored his own cautious emergence from the dark winter of the past 6 months. Since the warehouse incident, life had acquired a new rhythm. Calvin had moved with Mia to a modern townhouse in Cambridge, closer to her new school and farther from painful memories. Each morning began with their shared ritual: breakfast at the kitchen island, reviewing Mia's assignments, and their special handshake before he dropped her at school. Dr. Way had suggested consistent routines to help rebuild Mia's sense of security, and Calvin had embraced the advice with characteristic thoroughness. At Blackwood Home Goods, a different kind of reconstruction was underway. As trustee, Calvin had implemented sweeping changes, bringing in new leadership and refocusing the company on the innovative architectural integration that had fueled its original success. The scandal surrounding Laurel and Palmer had initially threatened the company's reputation, but Calvin's transparent handling of the crisis had gradually restored confidence among clients and investors. Today marked a significant milestone. The custody arrangement was up for review, and Laurel had petitioned for expanded visitation rights. Since the warehouse incident, her relationship with Mia had been limited to supervised visits twice a month, conducted under the watchful eye of a court-appointed monitor. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Zoe asked as they walked toward the courthouse. In the aftermath, she had become not just Calvin's professional partner, but a trusted confidant and friend to both him and Mia. "No," Calvin admitted, "but it's not about me. Mia needs some kind of relationship with her mother, however complicated." Inside, Laurel was already seated with her attorney. The physical changes in her were striking. She appeared thinner, more subdued, her once impeccable style now more conservative and restrained. When she made eye contact with Calvin, there was none of the previous hostility, only a weary resignation. The hearing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Laurel had completed all court-mandated requirements: therapy, parenting classes, community service for her role in the financial fraud. Dr. Way testified that while Mia continued to show anxiety around her mother, limited but regular contact would be beneficial to her long-term emotional health. When the judge granted Laurel unsupervised visitation 1 weekend per month, with additional supervised intervisits twice weekly, Calvin accepted the ruling without objection. The past months had taught him that some battles weren't worth fighting. Preserving Mia's well-being meant finding workable compromises, even with Laurel. Outside the courtroom, Laurel approached Calvin hesitantly. "Thank you for not contesting the visitation." Calvin nodded. "Mia needs both her parents." Laurel seemed to struggle for words. "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I am sorry, Calvin. Not just for what Palmer did, for all of it. I lost myself somewhere along the way." Calvin studied her, searching for the manipulation he had grown so accustomed to detecting in her words. Instead, he found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine regret. "We all lost something," he finally replied. "Let's focus on making sure Mia doesn't lose anymore." Later that day, Calvin received an unexpected visitor at his Horizon Designs office. Jasper Montgomery, CEO of New Summit Development, one of the largest commercial real estate companies on the East Coast. "I've been following your work for years," Jasper explained after introductions. "But I've been particularly impressed by how you've handled the Blackwood situation. Not many people could navigate that kind of personal and professional crisis with such architectural precision. Calvin smiled faintly at the metaphor. I appreciate that, though I wouldn't recommend my approach as a business strategy. On the contrary, Jasper leaned forward. It demonstrated exactly the qualities New Summit values: integrity, strategic thinking, and the ability to rebuild after catastrophe, which is why I'm here to offer you a partnership. The proposal was extraordinary. New Summit wanted to establish a joint venture with Horizon Designs, combining Calvin's architectural innovation with their development resources. The potential scale dwarfed anything Calvin had previously undertaken. This would be a complete game-changer for your firm, Jasper continued. And the timing couldn't be better, with the downtown revitalization project coming up for bids next month. Calvin considered the offer carefully. I need to review the specifics, particularly regarding my ongoing commitments to Blackwood. Of course. Take your time. Jasper rose to leave. But there is one condition I should mention. This partnership would require your full creative focus. New Summit would expect you to divest your interests in Blackwood. After Jasper left, Calvin sat motionless at his desk, contemplating the crossroads before him. The New Summit partnership represented everything he had worked toward professionally: recognition, creative freedom, financial security for Mia. Yet divesting from Blackwood felt like abandoning a responsibility, particularly to the employees who had weathered the recent turmoil. That evening, as Calvin prepared dinner with Mia's enthusiastic but messy assistants, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Calvin Reeves, he answered, balancing the phone while helping Mia measure pasta. Mr. Reeves, this is Judge Watkins. The distinctive voice of the judge who had presided over both the Blackwood case and the custody hearings was unmistakable. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Your Honor, Calvin replied, surprised by the personal call. What can I do for you? This is somewhat unconventional, but I wanted to inform you personally before it becomes public record. There's been a significant development in Palmer Flynn's case. Calvin moved away from Mia, lowering his voice. What kind of development? In exchange for certain considerations in sentencing, Mr. Flynn has provided extensive documentation regarding financial transactions at Blackwood dating back nearly a decade. Documentation that appears to exonerate you completely from any wrongdoing regarding the transferred funds. Relief washed through Calvin. While he had been confident in his legal position, the lingering cloud of the financial allegations had complicated both the custody arrangements and his leadership at Blackwood. There's more, Judge Watkins continued. The documentation also includes evidence that Russell Blackwood had intended to name you as an equal partner in the company as early as 5 years ago. It appears Laurel and Palmer deliberately concealed these intentions and manipulated the paperwork you signed. After ending the call, Calvin stood by the window, watching the sunset cast long shadows across Cambridge. The judge's information provided the final piece of validation he had sought: confirmation that his contributions to Blackwood had been recognized by Russell, that his claims had been legitimate all along. Yet strangely, the vindication felt hollow. The man he had been a year ago would have savored this triumph, would have immediately leveraged it to consolidate his position at Blackwood. But that man had been replaced by someone who understood that justice and victory weren't always the same thing. Daddy? The water's bubbling, Mia called, pulling him back to the present, to their half-cooked dinner, to homework waiting to be checked, to the simple reality that had become more precious than any professional achievement. Coming, sweetheart, he replied, returning to the task at hand while a plan began forming in his mind. Not for revenge or vindication this time, but for something far more important: closure. Chapter 8. Redesigning the Structure. The Blackwood Home Goods headquarters buzzed with anticipation on a bright June morning. The quarterly board meeting promised to be momentous. The first since Palmer Flynn's plea deal had been finalized and Judge Watkins had issued a ruling on the company's ownership structure. Calvin arrived early, taking a moment to appreciate the building he had designed nearly a decade ago. The soaring glass atrium captured the morning light, illuminating the central display of Blackwood's signature pieces, furniture that blended functionality with architectural elegance. It remained his favorite project, not just for its aesthetic success, but for what it had represented. The perfect harmony of his artistic vision and Russell Blackwood's practical business sense. In the boardroom, familiar faces greeted Calvin with varying degrees of warmth. Some board members had stood by him throughout the ordeal. Others had hedged their bets, waiting to see which faction would prevail. Laurel was present as well, seated quietly at the far end of the table, her role now reduced to that of minority shareholder. "Let's call this meeting to order," Calvin began once everyone was settled. "As you know, Judge Watkins has issued her final ruling on the company's ownership structure, confirming the validity of Russell's wishes as expressed in his will and supported by the evidence provided during Mr. Flynn's legal proceedings." There were nods around the table. The ruling had been front-page news in the business section, a definitive victory for Calvin that cemented his control of Blackwood. "What you don't know," Calvin continued, "is that I've spent the past month in discussions with several interested parties regarding Blackwood's future direction." Murmurs rippled through the room. Laurel looked up sharply, her expression wary. "I've received multiple offers to acquire majority control of Blackwood," Calvin explained, displaying the proposals on the boardroom screen. "Each represents a significant premium over current valuation and include provisions for retaining most of our workforce." "You're selling the company?" The incredulous question came from Harold Jensen, the board's longest-serving member and Russell's former friend. "After everything you went through to gain control?" Calvin smiled slightly. "Not exactly. What I'm proposing is a restructuring, one that honors Russell's legacy while allowing Blackwood to evolve." Over the next hour, Calvin outlined his vision. Blackwood would be reorganized into two distinct entities. The manufacturing and retail operations would be acquired by Meridian Home Brands, a respected industry leader known for treating employees well. The architectural design division, Russell's original passion and Calvin's primary contribution, would be spun off as a separate company called Blackwood Design Partners. This approach preserves the best of what Russell built while acknowledging the reality that our company needs fresh capital and leadership to thrive in today's market, Calvin concluded. Most importantly, it ensures that the employees who remained loyal through the recent turmoil will be secure. The board discussion was vigorous, but largely supportive. The numbers were compelling. The combined value of the proposed transactions exceeded what any had expected possible in the wake of the scandal. By the time the vote was called, approval was nearly unanimous. Only Laurel abstained, her expression unreadable as the meeting adjourned. Calvin found her later in Russell's old office, now temporarily his, staring at the architectural model of the first Blackwood showroom that still occupied a place of honor on the credenza. "You're really letting it go," she said without turning. "After everything." "I'm transforming it," Calvin corrected gently, "into something that can survive without us tearing each other apart." Laurel finally faced him. "And my shares? What happens to those in this grand transformation?" "They'll be worth considerably more than they are now," Calvin replied. "You'll be bought out at the same premium as other shareholders. Financially, you'll do very well." "It was never about the money for you, was it?" Laurel's question held genuine curiosity rather than accusation. "No," Calvin acknowledged. "It was about recognition, about the truth." Laurel nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I do regret how it all happened. Not just Palmer's insanity at the end, but all of it. The lies, the manipulation. We could have been partners in every sense if I'd been brave enough to be honest." "Perhaps," Calvin allowed. "But we're here now, and we still have one partnership that matters. Raising Mia." A ghost of a smile touched Laurel's lips. "She told me about her science project last visit. The one you stayed up all night helping her finish. She was so proud." "She's resilient," Calvin said. "More than either of us deserved." As Laurel prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "What will you do now, after the restructuring?" "I've been offered a partnership with New Summit Development," Calvin replied. "A chance to design on a scale I've never attempted before." "You'll be brilliant at it," Laurel said simply, and for the first time in years, her words to him held no hidden agenda, no manipulation, just a straightforward acknowledgement of truth. After she left, Calvin remained in the office, contemplating the model that had started everything. his first collaboration with Russell, the design that had saved Blackwood from bankruptcy and launched its national expansion. He ran his fingers over the miniature facade, remembering the late nights and heated debates that had produced it. The pride when Russell had first seen the completed showroom and declared it the future of Blackwood. In many ways, that moment had been the beginning of all that followed. The success, the betrayal, the fight for recognition. But it had also been the seed of something Calvin had nearly lost sight of during the bitter battle. The pure joy of creation, of seeing his architectural vision take physical form. The restructuring would be finalized within months. The new Summit partnership would begin shortly thereafter. But tonight, Calvin had a more important engagement. Mia's school play, where she was performing as the narrator, a role she had practiced relentlessly for weeks. As he left the Blackwood building for what might be one of the last times as its controlling trustee, Calvin felt not the triumph he had once imagined, but something quieter and more profound, the certainty that he was finally building the right things. Chapter 9. The Finished Design. 5 years later, Calvin stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel, surveying the gathered crowd of architects, developers, city officials, and media. The new Summit Horizon partnership had culminated in tonight's unveiling of their most ambitious project, the Renaissance District, a 15-block redevelopment that had transformed a neglected area of Boston's waterfront into a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood. Architecture isn't just about buildings, Calvin began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. It's about creating spaces where lives unfold, where communities form, where futures are built. 5 years ago, when we proposed this project, many called it impossible, too ambitious, too complex, too many competing interests to satisfy. On the screens behind him, images of the completed district appeared. Affordable housing units with innovative shared spaces, small business incubators, public parks integrated with historical landmarks, and at the center, the striking silhouette of the community arts center that had become the project's iconic symbol. What made this project succeed wasn't just design or financing, Calvin continued. It was remembering that every stakeholder deserved recognition, that every voice contributed to the ultimate vision. It was about building partnerships based on truth and mutual respect. In the front row, 15-year-old Mia sat beside Zoe, who had become Calvin's partner in business and, more recently, in life. Mia's face shone with pride as she watched her father accept the Urban Design Excellence Award, the architectural profession's highest honor for community-focused development. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Calvin was surprised to see Laurel approach, elegant in a simple black dress, her hair now styled in a sophisticated gray-streaked bob. "Congratulations," she said, offering her hand. "It's truly extraordinary, Calvin. Everything they're saying about it is deserved." "Thank you." Calvin accepted the handshake, noting how time had softened the awkwardness between them. Their interactions, once fraught with tension and calculation, had gradually evolved into a cordial co-parenting relationship. "I didn't expect to see you here. Mia invited me," Laurel explained. "She was insistent that I should see Dad's masterpiece in person. She's incredibly proud of you." Calvin glanced across the room to where Mia was animatedly describing some aspect of the project to Jasper Montgomery. "She's the real masterpiece. Smart, compassionate, somehow unfazed by everything we put her through." "Not unfazed," Laurel corrected gently. "Just remarkably well-adjusted, thanks largely to your stability. Dr. Way reminds me of that regularly." They shared a momentary smile at the mention of the psychologist who had guided their family through its reconstruction. Dr. Way still saw Mia occasionally, though now it was more mentorship than therapy, as she had developed an interest in psychology herself. "I heard Blackwood Design Partners won the contract for the Seattle waterfront project," Calvin commented, shifting to safer ground. "That's significant." After the restructuring, Laurel had surprised everyone by investing her buyout proceeds in the spun-off design firm, gradually working her way from silent investor to active leadership. Under her direction, Blackwood Design had developed a niche in sustainable commercial properties that was garnering industry attention. "It's our biggest project yet," Laurel acknowledged. Though not quite Renaissance district scale, some of us have more modest ambitions. Or perhaps more focused ones, Calvin suggested diplomatically. Their conversation was interrupted as Mia approached, slipping her arm through Calvin's with the easy confidence of a teenager secure in her relationship with her father. "Mom, have you seen the models of the art center? They have them displayed in the East Gallery. The acoustical design is amazing. They use this innovative reverberating panel system that Dad and Zoe developed specifically for the space." "I haven't seen them yet," Laurel replied with a warm smile for her daughter. "Would you show me?" As Mia led her mother away, chatting enthusiastically about architectural details she had absorbed through years of dinner-table conversations, Calvin felt a wave of unexpected gratitude. Despite everything, the betrayal, the bitter legal battles, the near tragedy at the warehouse, they had somehow arrived at a place where their daughter could move between her parents' worlds without carrying the weight of their past conflicts. Later that evening, as the formal events concluded, Calvin found himself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with Zoe, looking out over the Boston skyline with a newly lit Renaissance district visible in the distance. "Penny for your thoughts, architect," Zoe said, using the nickname she had coined years ago when they first began working together. "Just reflecting on journeys," Calvin replied, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. "5 years ago, I was fighting for recognition, for my place in something I helped build. I thought winning was the goal. Wasn't it?" Zoe asked, though her knowing smile suggested she already understood his answer. "Winning was never the point," Calvin said quietly. "Building was. Creating something meaningful, something that lasts. I got so caught up in proving my contribution to Blackwood that I almost missed the chance to contribute something far greater." He gestured toward the Renaissance district, its thoughtfully designed lighting creating a warm glow against the night sky. Unlike most urban developments, the project had prioritized community needs alongside profitability, creating spaces where people of various income levels could live, work, and connect. It had required all of Calvin's architectural skill and business acumen. But more importantly, it had demanded the wisdom he had painfully acquired through the Blackwood ordeal, understanding that true legacy came not from recognition, but from impact. "You know what I find fascinating?" Zoe mused, her gaze following his toward the district. "That warehouse, where everything came to a head, it was right in the middle of what's now the Arts Center Plaza. You literally built something beautiful over the darkest moment." Calvin hadn't planned it that way consciously, but the symbolism wasn't lost on him. The warehouse had been demolished early in the development process, its negative associations erased by new construction that emphasized community and creativity. "Speaking of building things," Zoe continued, turning to face him directly, "I've been thinking about our own foundation." Calvin recognized the meaningful inflection in her voice. They had been discussing marriage recently, approaching the subject with the careful consideration both their professional training and personal histories demanded. "I believe we have excellent architectural fundamentals," he replied with a smile, taking her hands in his. "Strong shared values, compatible design aesthetics, proven structural integrity under stress." Zoe laughed. "Always the architect with your building metaphors. But yes, I agree with that assessment. So perhaps it's time to finalize the blueprints?" In response, Calvin reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was not a traditional engagement ring, but a miniature architectural model, a perfect replica of their favorite shared space, the riverside studio where they had worked late so many nights, rendered in silver and gold. "It's a custom design," he explained as Zoe examined it with widening eyes. "The actual ring is inside the model. You have to open the central skylight." When she did, revealing the platinum band set with sapphires that match her eyes, Zoe's expression transformed from surprise to absolute certainty. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's build this together." 2 days later, as Calvin helped Mia with her trigonometry homework at the kitchen island of their Cambridge home, his phone buzzed with a text from Laurel. "Just heard from Jasper. The Art Center is already being studied in architecture programs nationwide. Your design changed more than a neighborhood. It's changing how people think about urban spaces. Russell would have been proud. Calvin read the message twice, struck by its simple sincerity. There had been a time when any communication from Laurel had required careful analysis for hidden motives or manipulations. Now, it was just what it appeared to be, a genuine acknowledgement from one professional to another, from one parent to the other. "Everything okay, Dad?" Mia asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "Everything's perfect," Calvin replied, turning back to the equation they'd been solving. "Just getting some good news about the Renaissance project. Ms. Chin mentioned it in our urban studies elective yesterday," Mia said proudly. "She said it's a case study in equitable urban renewal." "Everyone looked at me when she said your name. And how did that feel?" Calvin asked, curious about how she navigated the public aspects of his increasingly prominent career. Mia considered the question with typical thoughtfulness. "Good, mostly, but also a little strange. Because they see you as this famous architect who transformed the waterfront, but I just see you as my dad who still can't figure out how to use the new coffee maker." Calvin laughed, grateful beyond words for his daughter's grounding perspective. "Fair enough. Though in my defense, that coffee maker has more programmable functions than my first design software." As they returned to the homework, Calvin reflected on the irony of his journey. 5 years ago, he had been consumed by the need for recognition, fighting desperately to prove his role in building Blackwood's success. He had transferred millions, engaged in legal warfare, and come perilously close to losing sight of what truly mattered in his determination to claim credit for his contributions. Yet in letting go of Blackwood, of the need for vindication, of the bitterness that had threatened to define him, he had found not just recognition, but something far more valuable. The opportunity to build a legacy worthy of his best skills, a family structure resilient enough to withstand life's inevitable stresses, and the wisdom to appreciate that the most important designs were those that created space for growth and renewal. He had entered this journey seeking to be acknowledged as a builder. He emerged understanding that what endured wasn't who received credit for the design, but how well that design served those who lived within it. And in that understanding was the truest form of victory. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.